Handsome Duke obsessively pursues the ostracized single mom. The whispers started the moment Lydia Hart entered the market square. You'd think after 3 years people would find something new to gossip about. But in this small village on the edge of the Wexford estate, scandal had a long memory. The widow with the questionable past. The woman whose husband died in disgrace. The single mother raising a boy some dared to call illegitimate, though never quite loud enough for her to challenge them directly. Lydia pulled her worn shawl tighter and gripped her basket, pretending not to notice the way conversations stopped when she approached the vegetable stalls. Her son Tom, 6 years old, with wild brown hair and endless questions, tugged at her skirt. "Mum, why is everyone staring?" "They're not, love. Come on, we need potatoes." But they were staring, and more than usual today, because this was the 3rd time this week that Gabriel Ashford, the Duke of Wexford himself, had appeared wherever she happened to be. 2 days ago, outside the schoolhouse where she'd collected Tom. Yesterday, on the lane near the laundry where she worked. Now, here at the market, tall and annoyingly handsome in his perfectly tailored coat, talking to tenants about rents while his eyes kept drifting toward her. Lydia focused on haggling with the potato seller, a sour-faced woman who charged her more than she charged anyone else. The price was insulting, but Lydia had learned to swallow her pride. She counted out her precious coins when a loud voice cut through the market noise. Mrs. Hart. Mr. Barrow, the landlord's agent, pushed through the crowd with the self-importance of a small man given too much power. His face was red, his voice deliberately loud. "Mrs. Hart, I've been looking for you. The arrears on your cottage are now 6 weeks overdue. If you cannot pay by next Friday, you and the boy will be put out." The market went silent. Everyone turned to watch. This was entertainment. Lydia's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin up. "Mr. Barrow, I explained last week that I'm waiting on payment for 3 washing orders. I'll have your money by the end of the month." "End of the month isn't good enough," he smiled, showing yellow teeth. "Friday or you're out. Maybe, if you'd made better choices in life, you wouldn't be in this position." Someone nearby snickered. Another voice muttered just loud enough to carry, "Women who live in sin should know hardship." Tom pressed against her leg, frightened by the hostile attention. Lydia wanted to scream, to tell them all that her marriage had been legal, that Samuel had been accused falsely, that she'd done nothing wrong, except love an imperfect man. But she'd learned that defending herself only fed the gossip. "I understand, Mr. Barrow. Friday." "Actually, you don't understand." The voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. The Duke of Wexford stepped forward, and suddenly Mr. Barrow looked much smaller. "Your Grace," Barrow bowed awkwardly. "I was just conducting estate business." "Estate business is my responsibility." Gabriel's voice was calm, almost pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "All tenancies on Wexford land fall under my personal oversight. Mrs. Hart's account should have been sent to me weeks ago. Why wasn't it?" "Well, that is, the usual procedure." "The procedure is changing. Effective immediately. No tenant will be evicted without my personal review of their circumstances." Gabriel glanced around the watching crowd. "I believe we've been too quick to judge and too slow to help. Send Mrs. Hart's account to the main office. I'll examine it myself." The market was absolutely silent now. Everyone stared, not at Lydia, but at the Duke who had just publicly defended the village scandal. Lydia felt her humiliation deepen. She hadn't asked for rescue, especially not in front of everyone who already thought she was trying to rise above her station. "Your Grace, that's very kind, but—" "It's not kindness, Mrs. Hart. It's responsibility." His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not pity, something warmer and far more dangerous. Tom, who had no sense of appropriate silence, piped up loudly, "Mum, Is that the Duke who keeps staring at you?" Someone laughed. Gabriel actually choked. Lydia wanted the cobblestones to open and swallow her whole. "Tom, hush!" "But he does stare. I've seen him 3 times. "That's observant of you, young man." Gabriel cleared his throat, looking remarkably uncomfortable for a duke. "What's your name?" "Tom Hart, sir. I'm 6. I can count to 100. "Impressive." Gabriel smiled, and Lydia hated how genuine it looked. "Your mother is raising you well. She works very hard. Sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm asleep, but I hear her." "Tom," Lydia grabbed his hand. "I'm so sorry, Your Grace. We should go." She pulled Tom away, ignoring the stares and whispers that erupted the moment they turned their backs. Her heart pounded with embarrassment and anger. The Duke had meant well, perhaps, but he'd just made everything worse. Now, everyone would think she'd deliberately caught his attention. The gossip would be unbearable. That evening, as Lydia stirred a thin soup over her cottage's small fire, Tom played with his wooden horse on the floor. The cottage was tiny, drafty, and the roof leaked when it rained, but it was theirs. Or it had been, until the rent fell behind. She'd tried so hard to keep up. Laundry work paid little. Sewing brought in extra coins, but not enough. Samuel's death 3 years ago had left her with nothing but debts and a ruined reputation. The embezzlement charges against him had never been proven, but in people's minds the accusation was proof enough. Her own family had cut her off when she'd refused to abandon Samuel's memory and admit he'd been a criminal. When she'd discovered she was pregnant after his death and chose to keep the baby, her parents had called her foolish and shut their door forever. So she'd moved here, to this village, using her married name and what little savings she had. She'd started over, working honestly, raising Tom alone. And for 3 years, she'd endured the whispers and the cold shoulders because she had no other choice. Now the Duke of Wexford had decided to take an interest in her, and everything was falling apart. A knock at the door made her jump. Tom ran to answer it before she could stop him. "Mum, there's a man with a letter." The estate messenger handed her a sealed envelope with the Wexford crest pressed into red wax. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. "Mrs. Lydia Hart is summoned to Wexford Hall tomorrow at 10 o'clock to discuss the welfare of her household and the education of her child. Please confirm your attendance with the messenger." Lydia stared at the formal words. A summons, not a request. "What does it say?" Tom bounced excitedly. "Are we in trouble?" "No, love. The Duke wants to talk to us." "About what?" That was the question, wasn't it? Lydia met the messenger's neutral gaze. "Tell His Grace I'll be there." After the messenger left, Lydia sank onto her only chair. Tom climbed into her lap, sensing her distress. "Mum, why can't that man just leave us alone?" Lydia hugged him tight. "I wish I knew, sweetheart." But even as she said it, she remembered the way Gabriel had looked at her in the market. Not with the pity she'd seen from others, or the judgment, or the sly interest of men who thought a desperate widow might be easy prey. He'd looked at her like she mattered, like she was someone worth defending. And that terrified her more than anything. 2. Wexford Hall rose from the countryside like something from a storybook, all stone towers and endless windows that caught the morning sun. Lydia approached it with Tom's hand clutched in hers, wearing her best dress, which was still obviously simple and worn. Tom's eyes were huge. "Mum, is this a castle?" "It's a manor house, love. Remember your manners." A butler, imposing in black, opened the door and led them through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Servants paused to stare. Lydia heard whispers following them. "That's her, the widow. What's she doing here?" The Duke's study was smaller than she'd expected, lined with books and smelling of leather and paper. Gabriel stood by the window, and when he turned, she was struck again by how handsome he was. Dark hair, strong features, eyes that seemed to see too much. "Mrs. Hart, thank you for coming," he smiled at Tom. "And you must be the young man who can count to 100. "I can. Want to hear?" Tom let his grace speak. Lydia straightened her shoulders. "You summoned us, your grace. May I ask why?" Gabriel gestured to chairs. Once they were seated, he leaned against his desk with deliberate casualness, as if trying to put them at ease. "I've been reviewing the estate's relationship with our tenants. I've noticed that many children, particularly from families with limited means, receive inadequate education. I'd like to change that." Lydia's heart sank. Here it came, the charity speech. "I'm proposing to sponsor Tom's continued education at the local school, and later, if he shows aptitude, at a technical college, as part of a broader program for tenant families." The offer was generous, impossibly generous, and completely transparent. "Your Grace, I appreciate the thought, but I must be honest." Lydia met his eyes directly. "You don't know any other tenant by name. Let's not pretend this is about policy." Gabriel blinked, clearly surprised by her directness. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You're right. I apologize for the pretense." He straightened. "I've been concerned about you and Tom. The way the village treats you is unjust. So you've decided to make me your charity project." "That's not." "Your Grace, I've lived 3 years as the object of people's pity and judgment. I won't add you to that list." Lydia stood, pulling Tom up with her. "Thank you for your concern, but we'll manage on our own. Mrs. Hart, please." Gabriel moved to block her path, then thought better of it and stepped aside. "I'm making a mess of this. I don't want you to be my charity project. I can't stand watching a good person be punished for circumstances beyond her control." Something in his voice made her pause. She looked at him properly, past the handsome face and the title, and saw genuine frustration there. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why do you care?" Gabriel hesitated, and in that hesitation, Lydia saw the truth. He wasn't quite ready to speak. "Because," he said finally, "in a world of people who say one thing and mean another, you're the first honest person I've met in years." Tom tugged her skirt. "Mum, I think he likes you." "Tom?" But Gabriel laughed, the tension breaking. "Your son is remarkably perceptive." Lydia felt her face heat. This was impossible. Dukes didn't develop feelings for disgraced widows. This was some kind of mistake, or temporary fascination, or "I should go. Will you at least consider the offer, for Tom's sake?" She wanted to refuse on principle, but when she looked down at her son, bright and curious and deserving of every opportunity she couldn't give him, her pride felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'll think about it." As they left, Lydia's mind spun. Gabriel's attention was going to make everything worse. Already she could imagine the village gossip. She's ensnared the Duke, using her child to get ahead. What did she promise him? But more troubling than the gossip was the way her heart had jumped when Gabriel smiled at Tom. When he'd called her honest. When he'd looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. She couldn't afford these feelings. She'd learned the hard way that trusting people, letting them matter, only led to pain. The following days proved her fears correct. Lydia noticed the stares intensifying wherever she went. Mrs. York, the village busybody, who led the self-appointed Moral Improvement Society, made pointed comments at the laundry about certain widows, who seemed to be attracting inappropriate attention. When Lydia passed a group of women at the well, someone said loud enough for her to hear, "Not bad for a laundress. Perhaps I should try attracting a duke too." The laughter that followed burned in Lydia's ears. Tom's schoolmaster, Mr. Crawford, pulled her aside after lessons one afternoon. He was a stern man who'd never been particularly kind, but today he seemed almost uncomfortable. "Mrs. Hart, I've received word from Wexford Hall. His Grace has instructed that Tom is to remain enrolled regardless of financial difficulties." Lydia felt her temper, usually so carefully controlled, snap. Did he indeed? She marched home, fury building with every step. She would not be managed like some helpless creature. She would not have her life rearranged by a duke who thought he knew what was best for her. When she reached her cottage, she stopped short. The Duke of Wexford was on her roof. He'd removed his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong forearms as he worked alongside the estate carpenter, attempting to fix the leak she'd been trying to patch with rags for months. Tom stood in the garden, staring up in wonder. "Mum, the Duke's on our roof!" "Of course he is." Lydia crossed her arms. "Your Grace, what exactly are you doing?" Gabriel looked down, hammer in hand, and had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "The carpenter mentioned your roof was leaking. I thought I'd help. You're a duke, not a roofer. I'm perfectly capable of basic repairs." He reached for a tile, his hand slipped, and suddenly he was sliding down the slope with a shout of alarm. The carpenter grabbed him. Tom shrieked. Lydia's heart stopped. Gabriel caught himself at the edge, breathing hard, and looked down at her with a sheepish expression that was so unlike a dignified duke that Lydia couldn't help it. She laughed. She laughed until tears came, all her anger and fear and confusion pouring out in helpless giggles. Tom joined in, then the carpenter, and finally Gabriel himself, still clinging to the roof's edge. "I suppose I deserved that," he called down. "You suppose correctly." 20 minutes later, they sat in Lydia's tiny kitchen, Gabriel nursing a cup of tea, and a bruised thumb where he'd struck it with the hammer. The cottage's small space made him seem larger, more present. He looked absurdly out of place among her worn furniture and chipped dishes. Tom had insisted on helping by showing Gabriel his collection of interesting rocks. Gabriel examined each one with solemn attention, asking questions that made Tom glow with pride. Watching them together did something dangerous to Lydia's carefully guarded heart. "Your Grace," she said finally, "we need to talk honestly. Please, call me Gabriel, at least in private." "That's not proper." "Neither is me being on your roof." He smiled. "Honesty, remember? You asked for it." Lydia took a breath. "Your help is making things worse. Every time you appear, every kindness you show, the village talks more. They already think I'm trying to rise above my station. Your attention is feeding that belief." Gabriel's smile faded. "I know. I've heard the gossip." "Then you understand that affection from a duke, however well meant, is dangerous. You can go home to your world, Your Grace. I have to live in this one when you leave." The words hung between them. Tom, sensing the tension, went quiet with his rocks. Gabriel set down his teacup carefully. "What if I don't want to leave? That's not realistic. What if I'm tired of my world? Of women who flirt with my title but never ask what I actually think? Of conversations that are all performance and no truth?" He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "What if watching you carry a basket twice your size up a muddy lane, while Tom danced in puddles, showed me more about strength and joy than any ballroom ever has?" Lydia's breath caught. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I've been finding excuses to come to the village since the day I saw you standing in a rainstorm, refusing to run home because you'd promised Tom you'd finish the washing. You were soaked through, exhausted, and you were singing to keep his spirits up." "You saw that," Lydia whispered. "I couldn't look away." Gabriel's voice was rough. "I still can't." Before she could respond, heavy footsteps sounded outside. The door burst open without a knock, and Mr. Barrow appeared with Mrs. York and 2 other village women behind him. "Your Grace!" Barrow looked triumphant. "I'm so glad to find you here." We were concerned when we heard you were visiting Mrs. Hart alone. Most improper." Mrs. York peered past him, her eyes taking in the intimate scene, Gabriel in shirt sleeves, Lydia's flushed face, Tom watching wide-eyed. "Your Grace, as leaders of the village's moral community, we feel obligated to warn you." "Mrs." York's voice dripped false concern. "This woman has a questionable past. Her husband died under scandalous circumstances. There are even questions about the child's legitimacy." "Stop." Gabriel stood, and the temperature in the room dropped. "You will not speak about Mrs. Hart or her son that way in my presence, or anywhere else for that matter. But Your Grace, we're only thinking of your reputation." "My reputation is my concern. Mrs. Hart is a lawful widow who has worked honestly to support herself and her child. She has committed no crime except marrying a man who was accused, never convicted, of wrongdoing." Gabriel's voice was ice. "The way this village has treated her is shameful." "Your Grace, surely you can't mean to associate yourself with..." Mr. Barrow tried. "I mean to do exactly that. In fact, I'm formally placing Tom under my personal patronage. His education, his welfare, his future all now fall under my direct protection." Gabriel moved to stand beside Lydia's chair. "Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to discuss it with me. Personally." The silence was absolute. Mrs. York's face turned purple. Mr. Barrow stammered something incomprehensible. They retreated in confusion. When the door closed behind them, Lydia finally breathed. "You shouldn't have done that." "I should have done it months ago." "Gabriel," his name slipped out, "they'll make your life difficult now. Let them try." He knelt beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. "Lydia, I'm not playing games. I'm not going to lose interest next week and leave you to face the consequences alone. I'm declaring where I stand." Tom, who'd been silent throughout, suddenly spoke up. "Mum, if the Duke likes us so much, why don't you just marry him?" Lydia choked. Gabriel's eyes widened. Then, slowly, he smiled. "That," he said softly, "is an excellent question." 3 days later, Tom fell ill. It started with a cough during a cold snap, the kind of deep, rattling cough that terrified mothers. By the second day, he had a high fever, and Lydia sat by his bed through the night, pressing cool cloths to his forehead and whispering stories to keep him calm. She'd sent for the village doctor, but he was too busy to come promptly. Lydia suspected Mrs. York's influence, though she couldn't prove it. By the third morning, Tom's breathing was laboured, and Lydia was beyond exhaustion. She was debating whether to somehow carry him all the way to Wexford Hall when she heard rapid hoofbeats outside. Gabriel burst through the door, followed by a distinguished older man carrying a medical bag. "Where is he?" Lydia was too tired to be surprised. She simply pointed to the small bedroom. Gabriel's physician, Dr. Matthews, examined Tom with gentle efficiency while Gabriel stood in the doorway, his face tight with worry. Lydia sank onto her rickety chair, suddenly aware she'd been awake for 2 days straight. "The boy needs warmth, rest, proper medicine, and less damp," Dr. Matthews announced. "This cottage is too cold. The roof leak isn't helping." "I know," Lydia said through numb lips. "I'm doing the best I can." "Which is considerable, Mrs. Hart." The doctor's voice was kind. "But your best shouldn't have to include fighting a fever in a drafty cottage while the village doctor ignores your calls." Gabriel disappeared outside. Lydia heard him giving rapid orders to someone. Minutes later, footmen appeared with clean blankets, a portable brazier, medicine bottles, and hot broth. Lydia watched in dazed astonishment as her cottage transformed. The fire was built up. Tom was wrapped in blankets that cost more than everything she owned. Gabriel himself sat on her floor in his expensive coat, helping to settle Tom more comfortably. "There now, young man," Gabriel said softly. "You're going to be fine. Tom's fever-bright eyes focused on him. Promise? I promise. You're under my protection, remember? Dukes don't break promises. Something in Lydia broke. All her careful control, her determination to manage alone, her fear of depending on anyone, it cracked open, and tears spilled over. If people weren't so busy punishing me for being alone, she heard herself say, voice raw, maybe my boy would see a doctor sooner. Gabriel looked at her, and the compassion in his eyes undid her completely. She put her face in her hands and wept silently, shoulders shaking. She felt Gabriel's hand, tentative, on her shoulder. Then his arms around her, holding her while she cried out 3 years of exhaustion and fear and loneliness. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize for being human. His voice was rough. You've been carrying too much alone for too long. Later, after Tom had taken medicine and fallen into a more peaceful sleep, Lydia and Gabriel sat on either side of the small bed. Dr. Matthews had left instructions and promised to return tomorrow. Why are you doing this? Lydia asked quietly. Because you matter, both of you. You barely know us. I know enough. Gabriel looked at Tom's sleeping face. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met. I know your son is bright and curious because you've raised him with love despite impossible circumstances. I know that watching you refuse to break has changed something in me. Lydia's heart raced. Gabriel, people from your world don't marry people from mine. Then perhaps it's time that changed. Your family would never accept it. Your uncle, your position. My uncle has already written to warn me that my entanglement with you could endanger a vital railway deal. He suggested I either marry you immediately or end the association. Gabriel's smile was grim. Apparently, uncertainty is worse for business than scandal. And the railway deal? Can go to hell. Some things matter more than business. Lydia stared at him. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more. He reached across Tom's sleeping form to take her hand. Lydia, I'm not going to pretend this will be easy. Society will judge us. Some doors will close. But I'd rather face that with you than live a comfortable lie with someone I don't love. Love? Her voice was barely a whisper. Yes, love? He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I'm in love with you. I think I have been since the rainstorm, but I was too foolish to recognize it. Before she could respond, Tom stirred and muttered, Mum, are you and the Duke arguing again? Despite everything, Lydia laughed softly. No, sweetheart, we're talking. About marriage. How much did you hear? Gabriel asked, amused. All of it. I wasn't really asleep. Tom's grin was weak but genuine. You should say yes, Mum. He likes us, and he fixed our roof. Sort of. Tom, and you smile more when he's here, even when you're trying not to. Gabriel looked at Lydia with raised eyebrows. Do you? Don't encourage him, Lydia muttered, but she was blushing. That Sunday, the village church was packed. Word had spread about Gabriel's confrontation with Mrs. York, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. The vicar, an old man who'd been subtly influenced by Mrs. York's moral crusading, gave a sermon clearly aimed at Lydia. He spoke at length about fallen women seeking favour in high places, and the danger of those who use their circumstances to manipulate the sympathies of their betters. Lydia sat rigid in her pew, Tom pressed against her side. She felt every eye in the church on her, felt the weight of their judgment. Then Gabriel stood up. The church went silent. Forgive the interruption, Vicar, Gabriel said calmly, but I find I can't sit through any more of this. He walked down the aisle to Lydia's pew and offered her his arm. Mrs. Hart, would you and Tom care to take some air? Lydia's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to not make a scene. But Tom was already standing, and Gabriel's eyes held steady on hers. She took his arm. They walked out together, in full view of the entire congregation. Behind them, the church erupted in whispers. Outside, in the bright morning sun, Gabriel kept walking until they were well away from the church. "You just walked out of Sunday service," Lydia said faintly. "The vicar was being sanctimonious. I don't have patience for it." "Gabriel, you can't just—" "I can, and I will." He turned to face her. "Lydia, I'm done being subtle. I'm done letting people like Mrs. York and that vicar make you feel ashamed for surviving. Tom is officially under my patronage. As of yesterday, I've registered it with my solicitor, and I'm formally requesting that you consider my proposal of marriage." "You haven't actually proposed," Lydia pointed out. "Haven't I? I thought I did rather clearly in your cottage." "That was Tom proposing. You just agreed it was a good question." Gabriel laughed, and the sound was so free and genuine that several people leaving the church stopped to stare. "You're right. I'm making a mess of this." He took both her hands. "Lydia Hart, will you marry me? Not because it solves a problem or silences gossip, but because I'm in love with you and I want us to be a family. The three of us, however loudly the world objects." Tom bounced excitedly. "Say yes, Mum." Lydia looked at Gabriel, at this handsome duke who'd spent the last week on her roof, in her cottage, by her son's sickbed, who'd walked out of church for her, who looked at her like she was worth fighting for. "I'm frightened," she admitted. "So am I. I don't know if the whispers will ever stop. Probably not, but we'll face them together. I don't know how to be a duchess." "You don't have to be a duchess. You have to be yourself." He squeezed her hands. "That's all I'm asking. Be yourself. Let me love you. And let's build something real." Tom tugged Gabriel's coat. "Does this mean I get a pony?" "At least one," Gabriel promised solemnly. Lydia felt laughter bubble up, mixing with tears. It was terrifying and impossible, and completely mad. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." Gabriel pulled her into his arms, right there on the village green, in full view of everyone leaving church, and kissed her. Behind them, Mrs. York made a scandalized noise. Someone else cheered. Tom announced loudly that his mum was going to be a duchess. And Lydia, for the first time in 3 years, stopped running from hope. 5. They married 6 weeks later in the estate chapel, a small stone building that held perhaps 100 people. Gabriel had wanted her to have whatever wedding she dreamed of, but Lydia chose simplicity over spectacle. "I don't need to prove anything to society," she told him. "I need to marry you. The rest is just noise." The chapel filled with an odd mix of guests. Gabriel's aunt, Lady Mabel, sat in the front row, composed and elegant. She'd surprised everyone by travelling from London specifically to attend, declaring that any woman who can make my nephew stop being so dreadfully proper deserves support. Lord Whitmore and his wife attended, the elderly couple who'd married across class lines 40 years ago. They'd written to Lydia with encouragement and practical advice. Several younger aristocratic couples came, progressive-minded families who valued character over convention. Gabriel's Cambridge friends clustered together, grinning. But the back rows held Lydia's true guests, Mrs. Thornbury, the kind woman who ran the village bakery and had always treated Lydia with respect. The schoolmaster, Mr. Crawford, who'd quietly apologised for his earlier coldness. Other tenants and villagers who'd watched Lydia work honestly for 3 years and knew her worth. Tom walked beside Lydia down the aisle, holding her hand. She'd insisted on walking herself. "I've made my own way this far. I'll make my own way to you too." Gabriel waited at the altar, in his formal dress, and the look on his face when he saw her made every hardship worthwhile. The ceremony was traditional, but felt weighted, with meaning earned through struggle. When Gabriel spoke his vows, his voice was steady. "I, Gabriel, take you, Lydia, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Lydia's voice was equally clear. I, Lydia, take you, Gabriel, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When Gabriel kissed her, applause broke out, genuine and warm. I present to you, the kind curate announced, Gabriel and Lydia Ashford, Duke and Duchess of Wexford. Duchess. The word still felt impossible in Lydia's mind. The wedding breakfast, in Wexford Hall's smaller dining room, was more joyful than she'd expected. Music played, laughter echoed. The rigid boundaries between servants and aristocrats seemed to blur as people who would never normally speak found themselves sharing champagne and conversation. Lady Mabel gave the first toast, her voice carrying clearly. I won't pretend this marriage is conventional, but Gabriel has never been one to follow expectations. What I've learned watching him these past weeks is that sometimes our younger generation sees more clearly than we do. Gabriel saw in Lydia what truly matters: integrity, intelligence, and courage. Perhaps those are the real marks of nobility. To Gabriel and Lydia, may your courage be rewarded with happiness. The applause was genuine, though Lydia noticed some guests remained silent. Gabriel's friend Vincent gave a toast that made everyone laugh. I've known Gabriel since Cambridge. He was always the responsible one. So imagine my surprise when he became the scandal of the county. But here's what I know. Gabriel has never been happier, and Lydia has never been anything but genuine. To my best friend and his remarkable wife. When it was Lydia's turn to speak, she stood on shaking legs. I'm not accustomed to public speaking, she began. Her voice strengthened as she continued. I know many of you took a risk by coming today. Some of you lost invitations or faced criticism. I can't repay that loyalty, but I can promise this. I will work every day to be worthy of Gabriel's trust and your support. I may not have been born a duchess, but I will earn the title through my actions. Half the room rose in a standing ovation. Their first dance brought them together in the centre of the hall. Lydia had spent weeks learning formal dancing, terrified of embarrassing herself. But in Gabriel's arms, the steps came naturally. You did beautifully, he murmured. The speech, all of it. I nearly fainted twice. So did I. She laughed softly. What have we gotten ourselves into? Everything that matters. 3 months later, Lydia stood in her study. Her study, still a marvel, reviewing accounts for the new sewing room she'd established for tenant women. She'd found ways to employ widows and single mothers, women who'd been on the edge just as she once was. Gabriel entered with letters. You'll want to see these. The first bore Lady Marlborough's seal, the woman who'd cut them after the engagement announcement. Dear Duchess, I was wrong to withdraw my invitation. My granddaughter asked why she cannot marry for love like the Duke did. I had no good answer. Would you and Wexford join us for tea next month? Marlborough. The second came from a stranger. Asterisk. Your Grace, you don't know me, but you've given me courage. My father wants me to marry a man I don't love. I've told him no. He's furious, but I keep thinking, if a widow can become a duchess, surely I can choose my own husband. Thank you for showing us it's possible. Asterisk. Miss Catherine Blackwood. The third was from Mrs. Thornbury. Your Grace, my niece has been accepted to Teachers' College. She never thought to apply and thought it wasn't for girls like her. But she saw what you did and thought, why not try? You've changed more than your own life. You've changed what's possible for all of us. With deepest respect, Mrs. Thornbury. Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks. Gabriel wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You're not just a duchess, Lydia. You're proof that the world can change. I'm just trying to survive each day. That's all any of us do, but you're doing it visibly, and that matters." That evening, they walked the garden paths at sunset, following routes that had become sacred to them. Tom ran ahead with his new puppy. Gabriel had indeed provided the pony, plus several other animals. "Do you regret it?" Lydia asked. "Any of it?" "Not for a single moment, do you?" "Only on Tuesdays." Gabriel laughed. "Tuesdays?" "That's when certain ladies still cross the street to avoid me. We have our own friends now, better ones." They walked in comfortable silence. Some villagers still whispered when Lydia passed. Some doors remained closed. Mrs. York had never apologized, though she'd grown noticeably quieter after Gabriel formally requested the vicar be replaced. But other things had changed. Tom ran through the village freely now, proud to tell anyone who'd listen that his mum was the Duchess. The sewing room Lydia managed employed 15 women and was expanding. Gabriel had quietly ensured that no tenant would be evicted without fair review and genuine assistance. Lady Mabel had become a surprising ally, visiting regularly and introducing Lydia to other progressive aristocrats. Lord Whitmore and his wife had adopted them as honorary family, sharing hard-won wisdom about navigating society as outsiders. "Your Grace," a young woman approached hesitantly. It was Sarah, one of the first women Lydia had employed in the sewing room. "I wanted you to know my daughter starts school next week. She'll be the first in our family to learn reading." "That's wonderful, Sarah." "It's because of you, because you showed us we could want more." Sarah curtsied awkwardly and hurried away, overcome with emotion. Lydia watched her go, feeling the weight of what Gabriel had said. She wasn't just living her own life anymore. She was showing others what was possible. "Mum, Duke Gabriel, look what Pepper can do." Tom had taught the puppy to sit, more or less. They applauded enthusiastically. Tom beamed and ran off again. "He's going to be insufferable when the baby comes," Lydia said, then clapped a hand over her mouth. Gabriel stared at her. "Baby? I wasn't going to tell you yet. I wanted to be certain." "Lydia." His voice was wondering. "We're having a baby?" "Yes." "Are you? Is that?" He kissed her, fierce and joyful. When they broke apart, both were crying. "Our child," Gabriel said softly. "An Ashford heir, born of a duchess who started as a widow with nothing. Society will have opinions. Society always has opinions. But our child will grow up knowing that love matters more than lineage. That character matters more than convention. That's the legacy we're building." Tom came running back. "Why are you both crying? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart," Lydia said. "We're happy." "About what?" Gabriel knelt to Tom's level. "How would you feel about being a big brother?" Tom's eyes went huge. "Really? When? Can I name them? Can they share my pony?" "Probably. Eventually. And definitely," Gabriel laughed. As the sun set over Wexford Estate, painting everything gold, Lydia realised something profound. 3 years ago, she'd been alone, frightened, barely surviving. She'd believed her life would always be small, defined by other people's judgment. Now she stood in gardens that were partly hers, wearing a title she'd earned through resilience rather than birth, carrying a child who would grow up knowing that love could indeed conquer convention. It wasn't a fairy tale. Some relationships had never recovered. Some doors remained closed. She still had moments of doubt, still wondered if she truly belonged in this world of aristocratic privilege. But she had Gabriel, who chose her every day. She had Tom, thriving and happy. She had work that mattered, helping other women find their footing. And she had proof that the world could change, one courageous choice at a time. "What are you thinking?" Gabriel asked, his arm around her waist. "That I spent 3 years running from everything, from judgment, from hunger, from hope, from love." Lydia leaned into him. "And then you refused to stop chasing me. You were worth chasing. Even when I tried to send you away? Especially then. You were protecting yourself. I understood that." He turned her to face him. "But I also knew that underneath all that fear was someone who deserved to be fought for. Someone strong and honest and remarkable." Tom ran circles around them with the puppy, shouting about being a big brother. Lydia looked at her son, at her husband, at the life they'd built from impossible circumstances. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to run anymore. Not from gossip, not from hunger, not from love. This time, when someone chased me, I chose to stop and let him catch up. Gabriel kissed her forehead. "I'm so glad you did." As darkness fell over Wexford Estate, the lights of the great house glowed warm against the night. Inside those walls, a duchess who'd been a widow worked on plans to expand opportunities for women across the county. A duke who'd been too proper learned to laugh freely with a 6-year-old boy. And a child who'd once been whispered about as possibly illegitimate slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that he was loved and protected. The world hadn't fully accepted them yet. Perhaps it never would completely. But they'd proven something revolutionary. That love, when chosen with courage and defended with integrity, could indeed change everything. Even in rigid Victorian England, even across the chasm of class and circumstance, two people who saw each other clearly could build something real. And that, in the end, was worth every whisper, every closed door, every moment of fear. Because they'd chosen truth over convention, love over expectation, and each other over the world's approval. And they'd won.